my cup of tea. Oh, set to get down to -8 within the next few hours here in France. So I am loading up on the warm beverages. So welcome back to another video. Today I thought that I would sit and have a little bit of an informal chat with you about my books. I'm aware that I haven't actually told you, well, I haven't actually sat down in a video and actually spoken about the 3 books that I am contracted to write and my plans for other books in the future. So I thought that we would do that. We'd just have a little informal chat. I'll try and keep this as kind of succinct and to the point as possible, but I do have a tendency to ramble when I do videos like this, so I apologise in advance. So let's go back to August of 2016. So I had left a job in the June that I was really unhappy at. I'm not going to go into it, but I hated it. I hated the job. And I actually left at the end of June, beginning of July, without having another job lined up, which obviously, if any of you know, that's not what you're supposed to do. You're obviously supposed to find yourself another job before you leave the current one. But I was just so unhappy that I decided, sod it, I'm just going to leave and find something else. I also knew that I wanted to set up as a freelance writer, but I wasn't entirely sure how to go about doing it. So I was doing research into starting up as a freelance writer. I was doing the odd bit of voluntary writing and bits and pieces like that, but I hadn't got a proper writing job at that point. And a friend of my mum actually met a lady in a coffee shop in Huddersfield and got talking to this lady who is called Catherine. She's my very good friend now. And she got talking to Catherine about, because Catherine's a writer as well, so she got talking to Catherine about how she writes, blah, blah, blah. And then this lady said, oh, my friend's daughter wants to be a writer. And Catherine said, well, if she's interested in writing non-fiction, then let me know, because I know that my publisher is looking for new people, and, you know, I can put her in touch with the right people who could maybe, you know, she can submit an idea to them and see what they think. So anyway, this friend of my mum's passed my name on, and I got in touch with Catherine on Facebook, and we had a couple of really nice kind of conversations on Facebook, and we decided to meet up for a coffee. And she kind of asked what my background was, what I wanted to do, like, makes it sound like she interviewed me. She didn't. We just had a nice chat and a coffee. And she said, you know, would you be interested in writing non-fiction? And I said, well, actually, I had an idea for a PhD at one point. I'm not going to tell you what the idea was because I don't want anyone else to do it. It's still kind of festering around in the back of my mind as an idea for a PhD subject. And I said that I'd considered doing this PhD, but then I said to her, well, the difficulty with a PhD is that the only point of doing it really is if you want to go into academia, and I'm not sure I do. I think I'd rather go into writing. So do you think that this idea for this book, for this PhD, could translate to a book rather than it being a PhD? And she said, yeah. She said, I don't see why not. She said, obviously I don't know, but I think you should put the idea to this chap at this publishing house and see what he thinks. So over the next couple of weeks, I put together a proposal from this idea, and she really helped me in terms of knowing how much to put into the proposal, she didn't do anything for me, obviously, but she kind of showed me the format of how you would lay out a proposal for a non-fiction book and this, that and the other. So I wrote it, I sent it off, and within a couple of weeks, I think it was 2 weeks or so, my editor, Jonathan, came back to me and said, yeah, I really like the idea, I want to sign you for it. And that was one of those moments that I am always going to remember for the rest of my life. In fact, I know that I have some footage on my laptop of that moment when I found out that I'd got my book contract. So I'll insert it here, and this is like proper, I picked up the camera, right, to film this footage, not to put it on YouTube, because this is like, you know, 18 months on and it hasn't been published on YouTube up till now, but I wanted some footage of the moment that I found out, so just to record it really for myself for the future, so that I could go back and remember how excited I was at that moment. So I might put it in here. If you don't see it, then I'm sorry, I'm going to keep that little bit of footage private and personal for myself. Okay, so I was actually going to put the footage into the video, and when I went to find the clip, I played it on my memory stick and it was fine. I've imported it into iMovie, and for some bizarre reason, it's gone really, really high-pitched. And I can't work out how to edit it down so that it's not high-pitched in terms of the voice. But needless to say, I was incredibly excited. I was thrilled. I couldn't believe that I'd been chosen. I was just absolutely thrilled. So, book one, the first book that I was contracted to, was contracted at the end of August 2016, and I asked for a year to write it. So how it works with non-fiction is you provide an idea and a proposal to your publisher first. They will then sign that idea, and then you have a set amount of time to go away, write the book, and then deliver it for publication. So I had a year, so I had until August 2017 to write book one. Now, about 2-3 months in, I had an idea for book two, and my idea was that I had basically an idea for what this book could be about, but I also thought at the time that I could do simultaneous research for book one and book two at the same time. So I proposed the idea to him then, just a couple months after getting book one signed up. And again, I asked my friend Catherine, I said, is this normal? Can I do this? Can I propose for a second book before the first book's even come out? And she said, you can ask. And, you know, he might say, no, I want to wait until I've seen book one. Oh, pussycat. He might agree to sign it straight away. So, anyway, I emailed him and said, look, this is my idea for book two. I'm hoping that I can combine some of the research together for book one. This is the idea. This is when I think I'll be able to deliver it. And very casually, at the end of this email, I just said, oh, and also, I think there might be scope for a third book about blah, blah, blah. And that is literally how I put this sentence in. Bearing in mind that book two, I'd written another proposal for it. Not like a really long one, like the first one, but kind of somewhere in between writing a sentence and the proposal that I'd done for book one. And he came back to me and he said, I'll sign you for both ideas. And I was like, wow, God, that's amazing. So I basically, in the space of a month, went from having no job to having a 3-book deal, which I still don't think it's 100% settled into my brain yet that I am going to be a published writer. It'll sink in obviously when the book's on the shelf, when I start getting reviews, which I'm not even thinking about at the moment because it makes me panic thinking about the fact that people are going to be reviewing the book on Amazon and stuff. But anyway, I'm jumping a little bit ahead of the curve there. So that's kind of how the book deal came about. That's how I got the book deal. And in the last couple of weeks, I've actually thought of an idea for book 4, but I'm actually thinking I might like to swap out the ideas for book 3 and 4, like turn them around. Yeah, that's basically how I got the book deal. That's how it all came about. So I think what you probably want to know now is what the books are actually about. So book 1 is the one that has been written. I had from August 2016 to August 2017. Just drink my tea while the cat scratches on his scratch post. Have you done now? He gets so jealous when he thinks I'm talking to anybody and not paying attention to him. And then from September to now, I've been doing edits with a proofreader. I've been making sure that everything's set out right. What they do is they basically set the book out on A4 pages, how it will look when it's actually printed in book form. It's a bit difficult to kind of explain just sat here talking to you, but if you have a look through, I think is it the second day in the life of a writer? Or the week? Pardon me. It might be the week in the life of a writer video. One of those ones you'll see, I think I show some of the pagination there. But yeah, I've been doing stuff like that with them. I've had a first view of my book cover because it's a because it's a hardback book. It'll have a dust sleeve on it, a dust jacket, and I've seen the first version of that. I wasn't entirely happy with it, so I've sent it back with some suggestions, and I'm awaiting like the second proof of that. I've still got to do the index, but once all those things are done and once it's sorted, it will go to be printed, and then it's actually due to be published in June of this year. So it still feels like it's quite a way away, but I know that June will be here before I know it. So yeah, that's pretty exciting. So book one is called Lady of the House, 19th Century Women and Their Role in the English Country House, which is a very long title, but it's basically about 3 women who were all born in the 19th century and who either were born in an English country house or lived in an English country house as the lady of the manor during that period. And the 3 women that I've chosen are Harriet Cavendish, who was the daughter of Georgiana, the Duchess of Devonshire. She was the lady who Keira Knightley played in the recent film The Duchess. So it was her daughter, Harriet. I've told her story. The second lady is Elizabeth Manners, and she was the Duchess of Rutland, and she hailed from Belvoir Castle in Leicestershire. And the third lady is probably a little less known, and she's called Mary Isham, and she came from Lamport Hall in Northamptonshire. Well, she didn't actually come from there, sorry, she actually came from Ireland, but she married the baronet of Lamport Hall, and she moved to Lamport. Now, the reason that I chose these 3 women, basically the 3 women all did quite remarkable things within the sphere of their world. So Harriet Cavendish, or Harriet Leveson Gower was her married name. She basically married the English ambassador in France, and she moved to Paris, and she entertained Parisian society in Paris really successfully. But she was also born into this very strange menage a trois between her mum, her dad, and Lady Elizabeth Foster. And they all kind of lived under the same house. There were illegitimate children in the nursery, there were legitimate children in the nursery. It was all very strange. So she had a very unusual upbringing, but then she married and made a very successful career for herself as an ambassadress. So hers is a really interesting story. And then Elizabeth Manners was born at Castle Howard in North Yorkshire, and then she married the Duke of Rutland and she moved to Leicestershire, to Belvoir Castle. Now, Belvoir Castle has featured recently in The Crown. There were a few scenes for, well, I think most of Windsor Castle actually was the scenes that were supposed to be Windsor Castle in The Crown were actually filmed at Belvoir Castle in Leicestershire. It also featured in The Young Victoria, which was a movie with Emily Blunt, which came out, oh gosh, better going on for 7 or 8 years ago now. And Elizabeth Manners was quite remarkable in the fact that she is more or less single-handedly responsible for the castle that you see at Belvoir Castle today. Before she moved, the castle was not worthy of the name castle, really. It was more of a Georgian country house atop a hill. And she arrived at Belvoir and decided that she wanted to create a castle that was worthy of the name. And she employed the architect James Wyatt, and she worked very closely with him and with some plans that Capability Brown drew up for the gardens. And she created this absolutely beautiful country house and stately gardens as well. So her story is very interesting because up till now, a lot of people believed that men were the driving force behind architectural changes, and actually a lot of the time it was the women who were constantly at home, who didn't go to London for the parliamentary season, who decided to stay at home and do architectural changes to the house and gardens. At least that's what I'm finding in a lot of my research. Obviously, there were a lot of women that actually wanted to do the parliamentary season, were not interested in house management or anything like that. But I'm much more interested in stories of the women that did do those roles. So that's Elizabeth. She also had quite a lot of tragedy in her life, and she overcame the tragedy in quite a remarkable way. So I don't want to tell you too much more about her, because obviously I want you to go and read the book. But yeah, that's why I chose her. And then the third person, Mary Isham. She, again, is very similar to Elizabeth in that she was responsible for all of the a lot of the architectural changes at Lamport Hall in Northamptonshire. So she was a very strong, very charismatic Irish lady who was actually, her maiden name was Close, and the locals supposedly, this is kind of like the local legend, supposedly called her husband the Silent Baronet because she did all the talking. So she's quite a character, and again, a lot of the architectural changes that we see at Lamport today are down to the work that she did in the 19th century. Sorry, need to make sure I get my centuries right. So those are the three women I've chosen, and the book basically follows their stories and tells you about how they were born, their upbringing, their marriages, their lives, their own children, and then their deaths and their legacies that they left. So that's book one. Book two is kind of connected to book one in a way because it's kind of flipping, it's looking at the reverse stories. It's basically looking at the women who chose not to marry, who lived in country houses, who maybe were heiresses, and and basically how they lived successful lives as single women, which was not common at that time at all. I say at that time. So book one was all based in the 19th century, whereas book two is going to spread from the 16th century all the way up to the 20th century. So it's looking at different time periods. The reason I wanted to do this is because, well, the first reason was that there just weren't enough women from one century alone to warrant a book that just looked at one century. And also, I wanted to compare how expectations of marriage changed as well. I want to be able to look at what was expected of a woman in the 15th century versus the 20th century. And that's why I've chosen women across different centuries to do. Anyway, the first lady that I'm writing about is called Elizabeth Isham, and she's the oldest of my ladies. I think she's 16th century, but she might be 15th. I'm sorry, I probably should have looked at that before I started this video. The difficulty is that I've got that many women across that many books, across that many different centuries. It's really easy to get confused about them. But anyway, she's definitely from that kind of century. She's Elizabethan Tudor lady, and she didn't want to marry. She wanted to be more involved in religion. She wanted to read and to write religious texts, and she actually kept a very, very good diary all of her life. And so that's why we are able to kind of look back on her life as a single lady, because we've got these diaries. So my second lady is Anne Lister from Shibden Hall in West Yorkshire. She's not too far from where I was born and grew up. And she was a lesbian. She lived her later years of her life with a partner, but her early years were spent touring with her aunt and uncle. She was actually her uncle's heiress rather than her father's. And she was responsible for a lot of the architectural changes at Shibden, very similar to the women in book one. And she actually was very successful in setting up a number of mines on their land. So I'm really interested to find out more of her story as, you know, a single lady estate owner. My next lady is a couple, actually, and they are the ladies of Llangollen. And they are, well, they weren't Welsh, but they lived in Wales, and they were both country house heiresses, elite heiresses, who met at boarding school and fell in love. And they moved to Wales, and I don't know whether they bought Llangollen. I'm sure they did, yeah, I'm sure they bought it because they made changes to it and this, that and the other. I haven't researched them fully yet, so that's why I'm not 100% sure on all of their details. And again, they set up a very successful estate and lived there together, so I want to look at their relationship as well. And then the next lady of book four, I've got the temperature sign on my camera again, for goodness sake. I'm going to try and keep this quick. She lived down on the Devonshire coast, and she was an heiress. She was probably one of the most eligible heiresses of her time. She was born in the mid-19th century, and yet she never married, and we don't really know why she didn't marry. We don't know whether it was the fact that her mum was a little bit too hands-on, didn't want her to get married, wanted her all to herself. We don't know whether that's the reason or whether there was some kind of health issue that meant that getting married might have been a bit embarrassing. I'm not going to go into much more detail, but there could be that kind of reason as to why she didn't get married. It's all kind of down to speculation, really. But she lived in a very big country house, like I said, down on the Devonshire coast. And then, like I say, I need another 1 or 2 ladies because I'd like to do, basically, book 1 has got 3 women and their stories are across the entire book, and the chapters are broken up into their life events, so like birth, marriage, children, building a house, this, that and the other. Whereas book 2 is very much going to be, each chapter is for a lady, and it's going to go chronologically from the 16th century all the way through to the 20th. So I want about 6 or 7 women so that I can have about 6 or 7 chapters. So I need a couple more women, and I'm doing research for that at the moment. Book 3 is about Victorian women who've done good. And the reason I do that is because I have not thought about book 3 at all, other than that little sentence that I sent to my editor saying, I think there's scope for a book 3 here. So I haven't done anything else on it at the moment. It's basically looking at Victorian women who were born in poverty and raised themselves up to riches. Now, the reason that I don't think this really fits with book 1 and 2 is because it won't necessarily be about the country house. It's more about women's history. So in between book 2 and book 3, I'm thinking about asking my editor if I can insert a 4th book, which will actually be book 3. Sorry, I know it's confusing. And that will be about... Oh, do I want to tell people what this is about yet? Do you know what? I'm not. I'm going to keep this title close to my chest because I actually think this could be one of the most exciting ones. And as it isn't currently under contract, I don't want anyone else to steal my idea. So basically I've got an idea for a 3rd book, which would mean that I would have 3 country house books that are all kind of in a little mini-series. And then my Victorian Women Done Good book would be the 4th book, and that might then start a new series on women's history or something like that. So those are the books that I'm doing. I've still got my temperature sign thing flashing up on my camera, so it's going to cut out at any second. But I really hope that you've enjoyed that little chatty type video about the books that I'm writing. I am writing a couple of fiction stories at the moment, but I'm finding it really hard to find time to actually put into writing the fiction, because with fiction books you have to write them before you get them published. So that's a little bit harder because you're writing something you don't actually know if anybody's going to want to read it. But I'm trying every now and again when I've got a free weekend to spend a few hours over a weekend just trying to get that manuscript written for the fiction book that I'm writing. And I don't really want to talk too much about that because, again, it's not written, it's not contracted to a publisher yet. But I do want you to know that whilst I am writing primarily the non-fiction, there is a fiction book that is currently in production as well. So yeah, that's the book writing side of what I do. That's a little bit more information about my books. Like I say, book 1 is due to be published in June, and I'll be doing some more videos about that book as and when things get finalised. I'd really like to do like a book cover reveal and a vlog about when it's published and when I receive the book. Me and Tom have got a really funny idea for like a promo video for the book, but yeah, that's all going to be kind of planned out closer to June when the publication date's finalised. So yeah, really hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got any suggestions, if you've got any videos that you would really like me to do around writing, around my books, anything, then please do leave it in the comment below. I had a suggestion last week to do a writing journey video, which I know the beginning of this did tell a little bit about how I got to writing my books. But I'm guessing that person would like me to start from the very, very beginning of when I first started doing writing to where I am today. So that video is going to be coming maybe next week or the week after. So yeah, if you've got any suggestions of what you'd like to see, then leave it in the comments below. I am planning at the moment my kind of historical series, which I mentioned at the end of... I think I might have mentioned it at the end of the motivational video. I'm not sure, but I'm basically thinking of, well, I'm not thinking, I'm kind of planning it out at the moment, a series of videos that look at a specific historical topic, either surrounding women, the country house, or general periods in history that I'm particularly interested in. So if you have any suggestions for that, then please do let me know. And yeah, I am going to leave it here. I hope you're all having a lovely day, and I will catch up with you again soon. Bye!